Hello YouTube, and welcome to another episode of the Educated Barbarian and the Hagakure analysis. And we're starting again at 70. Many misguidedly believe that they are outstanding samurai by virtue of their devotion to the martial arts, and because of the discipline they amass. It is sad that such men make bone-breaking efforts but amount to nothing more than a martial artist. An art should be learned to the extent that you are proficient in it. Generally speaking, a person talented in many things lacks refinement and only retains perfunctory knowledge of important matters in their duties. A lot of words to say a lot of things that I might not necessarily agree with, and that are a bit obscure. And that is something that shoujo does a lot. Well, he will throw you a bone and you don't really know what it's about. It's not really in line with anything that was said before. It's sort of out of the blue. So let's try and dissect what was just said. So the devotion that you have towards an art, it might be lifting, it might be swimming, it might be chess, doesn't make you a good practitioner, right? It doesn't make you outstanding. And the amount of disciples that you amass doesn't either. I'm much more likely to agree with the second notion, meaning that a lot of people have followed individuals that were not worthy of trust, and these individuals amassed a lot of power through it because they gained influence based on the number of people who adored them. And it was never a good representation of who was correct or who was wrong, who was worthy or not. In a sense, it's much more of a reflection of the intellectual abilities of the followers and the marketing abilities of the person who wants to be followed. That being said, he continues and says that a lot of people go through a lot of effort, but they're never anything more than a martial artist. And there is sort of a distinction between the way of the warrior, and arts. Shoujo seems to have some disdain for arts. He often says that a warrior should not be skilled in poetry, in literature, in languages. They should only focus on the path, because the path is the ultimate art. So there are arts, and then there's the art with a capital A. Again, not something I necessarily agree with. You pick what you want to do in life. I think we should all be physically capable, but we don't have to all do the same thing, and I don't have to have another man do exactly what I do to consider him worthy of consideration. And after that, he's talking about proficiency, and he's also saying that someone who's talented in many things lacks refinement, because for shoujo, you should follow the way of the samurai if you're a samurai and nothing else, because it should consume your entire being in a sense. And in a way, for people, if you want to be really good at something, you better apply yourself to only one thing. Doesn't mean that you can't dabble in other things, but most of your efforts should go towards that one thing. And if you want to try other things, you should always remember that they need to feed your way. They need to feed your one goal, because if you don't, you're going to just divert your attention and you might not really amount to anything. You will be a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Just as the priest Konan Osho warned, acquiring knowledge is a good thing, but in many cases it can also be perilous. Looking at a man who has achieved something of merit, if he trains in order to know his own deficiencies, he will evolve into a competent servant. Nonetheless, such a mindset is difficult to realize. Many who study veer away from motivations of personal growth. Time and again, they have a high opinion of themselves and prefer to engage in splitting hairs. We've discussed that before. Shoujo is on the money again, and it clearly is an indication that there has always been an inclination in civilized men to become so attracted by matters of literature, of science, and by what I call the pen, that they become engrossed with it and they only exist through it. Meaning that they put all of their eggs in the spirituality and intelligence basket, and they completely remove themselves from the physical world, which in my opinion is not good. You need a balance of both. And the issue is that the direct result of such a practice is that they end up not evolving anymore, meaning that to be a better person, you need to apply yourself, and that is done through action. And if you remove that step out of the equation, if you only do the theory and not the practice, then the motivation of personal growth dies within you. And you're going to replace that by more studying, but it's never going to replace it in reality. And the issue too is that these people tend to have a very enlarged sense of ego that they have never really earned, because they never really proved to be able to do anything with their own body. And they engage in splitting hairs, and it's the end of the paragraph, but to me, it's what's most telling. How many times have you engaged in an argument with someone, especially about fitness or bodybuilding or powerlifting, to realize that they themselves do not practice it? They themselves do not engage in the sport. And yet they're willing to spend hours arguing about something that they've never done themselves? For me, 1,000 times. And I don't even try and push the argument with these people, because what is the point? You know, they are armchair specialists. That's the anointed term for that type of people. They like to discuss it, but they never actually do it. And in reality, they're not really interested in knowing if they're right or wrong. It's a way for them to feel superior. Because for the most part, these are people who are lacking on the physical side of things. And instead of accepting that they are at the bottom of the barrel and to work their way up, they'd much rather just rely on their unheard sense of superiority and argue the technical aspect, because they know that they can never lose. It's something I want to eventually discuss in the Educated Barbarian series. It's a book called The Art of Never Being Wrong. It's a book I really like, and it basically, the basis is, if you're intelligent enough and if you're intellectually dishonest enough, you can create an argumentative scheme that will ensure that you're never wrong. Not that you're not wrong in the way you think or that you cannot be debunked, but you're going to enter what I call circular argumentation, meaning that you will enter a discussion where you will never have to admit you're wrong. The type of people who enter that type of mentality usually are worthless. There's no point in talking with them, because you're never going to actually read or rather reach a common ground, because they refuse to have a common ground, because a common ground would mean that you would actually create something through debate. They don't care about creating, they just want to be right. And of course, this is not a good mindset, and it's the reason why these people never actually progress in life. There is a lesson to be learned from a downpour of rain. If you get caught in a sudden cloudburst, you will still get a drenching, even though you try to keep dry. Even if you try to hurry along, even if you try to take cover under overhang or roofs. If you are prepared to get wet from the start, the result is still the same, but it is not a hardship. This attitude can be applied to all things. As always with shoujo, you go from applications of specific samurai codes to something like this, which is just a life advice that is, in my opinion, just pure genius and greatness, because you can literally apply it to everything, and it always makes sense. If you know that you're going to endure hardship and you grit your teeth and you're ready to welcome it, it's not going to be hardship anymore. This is why training is so doable, because when you think about what training is, you're going through pain, you're going through muscle damage, you're wasting calories, all for strength gains or size gains. How is it worth it from an evolutionary point of view? It's not. We make it worth it because we decide it's worth it. And you enter that training session and you might even have joy. You might even enjoy that suffering, because you go in not even thinking it's a hardship. It's also the reason why people who have a martyr, I think it's the name in English, a martyr. That type of approach towards lifting where they suffer through it, they don't stick to it. Because unless you're masochistic, how are you going to handle something that is a hardship and that you inflict upon yourself? It's not going to work. The relationship is faulty from the start. So you need to accept these things through your attitude, and you will never suffer hardship, right? Of course, it's easier said than done in certain situations, but that's, in my opinion, a strategy to apply if you want to be as stoic as possible. All artistic pursuits can be of use in some way and are good if learned for the purpose of samuraihood. Unfortunately, many just end up becoming consumed in the arts. Learning can be particularly perilous in this sense. So as I said with the previous paragraph, if it doesn't serve your one way, then be cautious about it because it might become a second way. And if you have to travel two paths at the same time, you're not going to make as good as a time. You might become distracted, you might come back, you might even give up one path. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you realize that one path was not for you. You will, however, find that at some point in your life, you have to pick a path. You cannot keep switching it around. It's especially true with kids, and it's an interesting psychological effect of childhood. Kids are very flimsy. They switch their center of interest all the time. And it's good when you're a kid because you need to figure out what you like in life. However, it's up to the parents also to make the kid stick with stuff for a while. You can't let your kid be flimsy too much because if you let them develop that habit, they might be like that for the rest of their life. I was like that when I was a kid. I went from judo to swimming to soccer to wrestling to taekwondo because I never stuck with it. And some sports it was my fault, some sport it was because I was forced into them. But eventually I found bodybuilding and I managed to stick with it because it is my true love. It took me some time to find my true love. I'm also thinking that if I had stuck with some of those other things and not just been so lazy, I might have made something out of them. They might have became a path too, and maybe I would have never entered that path. That's a different discussion. It's, alternate realities and multiple dimensions, but what Shoujo says here is that if you have your one path now and you're happy with it, make sure that you don't become diverted onto another path by following something else with too much energy. And again, you see here that he's not saying that arts are bad, he's just saying that if arts are not put to the service of the samuraihood, then it is bad. When a distinguished spurman was on his deathbed, he summoned his best disciple and told him, "I have already conveyed to you the secret teaching of the school, so there is nothing left for me to pass on. If it is your desire to accept your own disciples, you must practice diligently with your bamboo sword, shinai, every day. Remember that the subtleties of winning duels cannot be grasped simply through the secret teachings. As another advice to students, one would say, calm your minds and review books of poetry the day before a meeting." What they were actually saying is that they were advocating the importance of becoming immersed in practice. So a lot of things here, some of which are just introduction for the sake of the narrative, but basically what we see here is that the key point and the key aspect of all of the discussion that we see in that paragraph is practice. You become better through practice, but that's not the only point. If it was the only point, practice would be much less interesting because it would just be physical. Practice is also immersion of the spirit into something that you do diligently every day. And things that you do every day become a part of you. This is why, even though progression is of the utmost importance, especially for bodybuilding, the very act of lifting is also its own thing because it's a routine, it's a hobby. And even if you don't progress, you will find that spending that time, even doing something non-productive within the parameters of lifting, is going to be a good thing. And not doing it can become a bad thing because it can lead to laziness. You will find that when you break a routine and you take a day off, sometimes you will be excited to come back the next day, right, and start anew. Usually that happens when the day off was scheduled. When the day off isn't scheduled and you broke your will and you took an impromptu day off, you will find that the laziness carries over and that the next day you will feel like also not going. And that's because you are feeding into a bad habit of yours. So you have to be careful with that. If a samurai practices day and night, then courage will swell from within. He will never become dispirited and will thus be able to demonstrate indomitable valor. This should be a warrior's attitude at all times. Same logic, I cannot agree more. Training is the most important parameter of lifting and of just physicality. It's what makes or breaks you. A lot of people who say that they don't get results, that they are going nowhere, and they blame their genetics and the wood, etc. When you actually question them, if they're truthful, you'll find out that they don't really train that much. Or when they do train, it's not intense, it's not really focused, it's poorly crafted. So no wonder they get no result. As you practice, the more you practice, the more confidence you build, and the more the momentum builds up. To the point where, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing, you might become addicted to training. You might be at a point in your life where you will become anxious at the very thought of missing a day. It happened to me. I got it under control, but still to this day, I will not miss more than 2 or 3 days of training. It's not in the cards. I will not accept it, okay? If I need to be out of my gym for a week or more, I need to mentally prepare myself, and most of the time, I need to find a gym where I'm going to be going, because I will not miss training. And this attitude is also going to be something that is actually a killer for anxiety, because when you're doing things, you don't worry about them anymore. And it's something that's true across life. When you have that big deadline or that big event, you think about it all the time, it's making you anxious. When you're doing it, the anxiety is gone. Why? You're doing it. You're in it now. So there's no reason to worry about it anymore. Same for training. I remember a few years ago, I was thinking about my deadlift and I was wondering, am I going to get stronger? And basically, I was building up anxiety for myself, and the more anxiety, the less I wanted to deadlift, and the more days I skipped, until one day where I just went in and did deadlifts, and the anxiety just went away. Why? Because I was back to the grind. I was back to lifting and doing something. And that's also how you keep your spirits high. If you want to have unbreakable spirit, you need to have an unbreakable body. And how do you do that? You train. You have a schedule, you're disciplined. And that attitude should be the same across life. If you can apply that hard work mentality to everything in your life, you will be golden. Of course, it needs to be balanced with rest. That's a different discussion. This one is very important. Be mindful of being manipulated. Be clear in stating your opinion if you disagree with what is being said. It is easy to make a terrible mistake even in seemingly trivial matters, so be on your guard. It is prudent to avoid becoming overly friendly with someone with questionable scruples, lest you are duped into his nefarious schemes. It takes years of experience not to be deceived. I'm going to go on a tangent here, and I'm going to talk about the word from a broader sense. I'm not going to talk about samurai, but I'm going to base it off of these words. Manipulation is everywhere, and for a simple reason, because people are going to be looking out for their own interest, and some people have no issue or quarrel using you for their best interest. A lot of that has become romanticized as, sociopaths and psychopaths. Yes, those people exist, and yes, they're dangerous, but it's not the majority of people who manipulate. The majority of people who manipulate are people who don't have scruples, who don't have a strong sense of morals, so they don't care. They'll just do what is best for them, and even if it hurts you, they don't care. That being established, it is now your duty to protect yourself. You cannot cry when you get manipulated. It was your fault. In a sense, in a perfect world, no one would try to hurt other people, and we would be able to be much harsher on the people who try. But in today's age, come on, if you get scammed, it's on you, you got scammed. It's an attitude that some people might not agree with, but for me, it's the only way to get through this. Because if you approach it with the attitude of saying, we need to punish the people who manipulate and the people who get manipulated are victims, guess what? You have now a lot of work on your hand, and you're doing it by yourself. Because you have to baby all of the victims that can't take care of themselves, and you have to go after all of the bad guys. It's the difference between teaching a man how to fish and giving him a fish. I personally say, teach people individually to take responsibility for their life and teach them how to see through manipulation. I have seen too many people in my life, people being manipulated in front of me, in front of my eyes, me being able to see through it, clear as day, them falling into the trap and then being unable to realize when I told them. This is scary. Maybe it happened to you, maybe you have an anecdote related to that. It's almost depressing to see how easy these people are to fool, but how tough it is to convince them that they've been fooled. It's something you might have heard before. It is much easier to fool someone than to convince them that they were fooled. It's a psychological bias of the human mind. Once we've accepted something as truth, it becomes a part of our identity, sadly, and it's very tough to change that, sometimes impossible, if the manipulation was done well enough. And you will find that a lot of people in this world are being puppeteered, meaning that they follow path or they have espoused ideologies that they don't fully understand, that has been implanted by someone else in their brains, and that serves the goals, serves the schemes of someone else, and for the most part is going to hurt them in the long run. And even though you know that, you will not be able to free them from it. Even if they suffered the consequences and somehow survived, they would still not be freed from it. So this is sort of the red pill, black pill dichotomy, where you either become very depressed at that thought and you give up, or you try and fight the source. You fight the manipulator. Because the manipulated, there's no saving these people, it's too late. So you have to go for the higher truth. It's the only way to end this cycle of manipulation. And I think we're going to end with this. Oh, maybe another one, and then we'll stop at page 88. Okay, because this one was a little bit heavy, I want to leave with something a little bit light. A specialist in an art is an artist. He is not a samurai. Aim to be referred to as samurai. Clear and simple. You are not a specialist, meaning that your goal is not to be extremely good at that one application or that one other. You're not a scientist. You're not going to have a PhD in bodybuilding. You should aim to just be a bodybuilder or a field runner, etc. It doesn't mean that you don't need to be educated, but the main expression of the passion should be done through the body physically. And once that is done, you'll also find that people will be much more receptive to hearing what you have to say because you will actually look the part. So that's going to be that for today. Again, I highly encourage you to buy this book because I only talk about the golden portions, the things that are the most interesting, but the rest of the book is almost just as good. It's just I don't want to spend 5 years doing that review. So please buy the Hagakure, please read it. It's a super good book for people who are interested in becoming better mentally and spiritually. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.